far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be in healthcare in some regard. And I said, okay, I'll become a nurse. And then I ended up finding kind of my passion in nursing. We're the only profession that is there from the moment that you open your eyes as a baby to the time you close them.
What do you think we can carry forward about the role of nurses in healthcare from the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, they matter now more than ever because we are increasingly losing sight of the fact that this is a human profession and the most human profession that exists. Advanced care planning is just the process by which you do a couple of things. You elect a healthcare power of attorney, so somebody to make medical decisions for you if you become unable to make them for yourselves.
How early should people start discussing advanced care planning?
18 is perfect. Doing it early is not only appropriate because we know these things happen, but you also have to understand that your parents at that age, they're not going to want to make, maybe the decision that you probably want them to make. How can we, restore joy at the bedside? How can we make the bedside a destination? We need better leadership. The data is out there. We know what has to change, but are we actually going to change it?
Welcome to the Nurse on Purpose podcast, where we challenge media stereotypes about nursing and spotlight the incredible and diverse roles nurses play in healthcare. I'm your host, Nello. Every week, I'll be joined by a nurse who is reshaping the narrative. From frontline care to leadership, education, innovation, and beyond. Our aim is to show the world that nursing is so much more than what we see on TV. Together, we'll explore how we can collaborate with media and other stakeholders to create authentic and inspiring portrayals of nurses. Let's begin the conversation and ignite change, one episode at a time.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nurse on Purpose podcast. Today's guest is Luke Adams, a critical care nurse with 16 years of experience, a travel nurse, business owner, and what he calls an entrepreneur. Luke has seen healthcare from every angle, at the bedside, in the boardroom, and everything in between. He's passionate about leadership in nursing, not as a bonus, but as a necessity. Luke believes it is time to challenge outdated norms, spark bold conversations, and reimagine what's possible when nurses lead with clarity, compassion, and courage. On today's episode, we will talk about leading stronger, dying better, and transforming the profession from the inside out. So let's get into it. Luke, you're welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's such a pleasure to have you here. One of the things that drew me to you, I have to say, is your LinkedIn caption that says, "No buzzwords. 16 years at the bedside, believer in honest, compassionate communication, and that the solutions to most problems are more simple than we think." Why do you take such a no-frills approach to healthcare and to nursing?
For the buzzwords, I think that they come about because of actual legitimate reasons, and there's good things behind them, but there comes a point where they become a trope as well, and I think we've kind of reached that saturation point over the last, 10 to 15 years of my career, where a lot of these things were, not invented, but, brought to light. And then we've kind of hammered them throughout the last 15 years. And people just stop listening after a while, and they don't want to hear the buzzwords anymore, and they just want action. They want to feel supported in a real way. And so, I just tried to say, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to call myself a compassionate leader or, a problem-solving nurse. We all are those things, I think. So I don't think you need to highlight those. You just need, I think we're in the stage now where action is way better than words now.
Right. And by buzzwords, let's say, do you mean burnout or kind of leading with heart? Those kinds of buzzwords. What do you mean when you say buzzwords?
I mean, they kind of span a whole bunch, but I mean, even things like magnet, it's a buzzword. It generates a lot of buzz. And, magnet's one of those things that I'm a little bearish on at this point in my career. I think it's a wonderful thing. And people who talk to me sometimes oh, why don't you like magnet? I do like magnet, but I feel like that is the icing that's on the cake. And right now what we have are a lot of cakes that are underdone and they're mush on the inside. And so putting magnet on top of them is not going to make it taste better for the people who are eating it. So, even words like that, but, you see it from the leadership side as well. Transparency, accountability, compassion, we want to, and how many of us actually know leaders that fit those particular descriptions, so everybody likes to put them out there as a way to say, here's what I'm doing. But I don't know. I find more and more that reality doesn't meet that. And so I'd just rather get away from that and let me form my own opinion of you through your actions. You know what I mean? You can tell people all day, but until you start showing them, then they're not going to believe you.
Yeah, actions do speak louder than words. And I think that the people who are intentionally making those changes or doing the work are not so bothered about the titles behind it, right? And it doesn't mean that you can't have the title. The title is great. It kind of, like you said, is the icing on the cake. It's the validation for the work that you've been doing. But what's sad is to have the title without the proof that you've done the work. What's your journey into nursing? What has that been like? How did you get started in nursing, and how did you get to where you are today?
Well, I think as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be in healthcare in some regard. It took me a little while to figure out how that was actually going to play out. I wanted to be a physician first. That was too much. I look back on that, and I think that was the right decision because it's a lot of years, as we all know, and I wanted to do some other things with those years, and I did not think I could dedicate myself fully to becoming a physician. So I left that track, and then years later came back to nursing through a second degree accelerated program, and with the sole goal of becoming a CRNA. This was 16 years ago. So, back then this was a really, really hot job. Whenever you looked at top 5 growing professions in America, this is spanning all things. Like CRNA was always in that top 5 in terms of work-life balance, compensation. Back then you didn't need a doctorate. You could just go to a 3-year program or something like that. So it was really one of those jobs that was getting a lot of media and buzz. And so they hooked me, and I said, okay, I'll become a nurse. I'll go get my critical care experience, which is what you needed. And in 2 years, I'll reapply and I'll go back to school again. And a couple of interesting things happened once I became a nurse. And I did go to a very large ICU to get that experience. And throughout the 2 years that I was going to be there getting that experience, I learned a couple of really important things. I learned what a CRNA actually does. And I realized that was probably not going to gel with my personality. I talk way too much. I love to be around people way too much. So an operating room is not a great place to put me because I will annoy everyone in there with random songs or whatever I'm muttering in the corner.
Who's not
Correct. Yeah. That's the only person I would not annoy in an operating room. So I knew that was probably not great for me. But, I started to learn what I loved about the job at the bedside. And so over the years, that kind of morphed from I want to be a CRNA, I want to go back to school. And I started traveling as well after spending 3 years at that very large ICU and getting a lot of experience. I started to travel, and I don't know, I got caught up in that and never went back to school. And then I ended up finding kind of my passion in nursing, which I'm sure we'll get into. But it does, I think, take people some time to figure it out. Some people just know, and that's great for them. When they come, out of school and they go, this is what I want to do with my career, and they have that focus, and it never changes, right? Like for me, if you would have asked me in my first year, I would have told you what I was doing, but it changed over time. So some people just are lucky enough to have that clarity right from the get-go, and they want to spend their career doing one lane. But for a lot of people, it can change over time, or maybe they have multiple loves, good for them. But you don't know that unless you actually do the job for long enough to realize that, which is another issue that we'll kind of get into. But for me, over time, it became clear that I really enjoyed being in the ICU, but also really enjoyed being a part of the dying process for a number of reasons. So that's ultimately why I think I kind of stayed there.
What was that moment when you knew that this was your true calling? End of life care was what you were called to do?
I think I remember the case that really brought it home for me because I had done, a lot of work with a patient and a patient's family.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, kind of, I don't want to say begrudgingly, but as most people do, they needed to have conversations about what was going on in the room. And then eventually they were able to change the patient's code status to a DNR. And I went home that night feeling pretty accomplished with myself for, putting that work in over the course of maybe 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
And then the next day I came in and the patient had arrested, had gotten CPR, and was now, alive,
Uh,
and very unhappy
wow.
about the fact that she was now,
Right.
on a ventilator, hurting and alive,
Yeah.
which
So a
was this.
DNR, for those who don't understand or who may not be medical here, the patient is upset because they did not want to be resuscitated, right? So they had an order put in for do not resuscitate, which is a DNR, but I guess somehow that order was what happened.
Yeah, it's so long ago that I don't exactly remember the
Okay.
circumstances to why, she ended up receiving CPR, but, it just really brought to the forefront, a couple of things for me over the years in the ICU. We do a very, very good job with the medicine aspect of things, but it is almost our sole focus. And we oftentimes don't have conversations surrounding things like, what if these interventions that we're doing don't work? Or
Mm-hmm.
where would you like these interventions that we're doing to stop? And then also, giving patients the freedom, if they're able to participate meaningfully in those conversations and give them the space to decide for themselves what is best for them and not
Right.
have us kind of decide that for you.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, obviously somebody decided that day to do
Mm-hmm.
something, for that patient.
Right.
And they were not too happy with it. And so, it really just became this thing that I was very interested in. I saw a big need for it because it was clearly a huge gap,
Yeah.
in healthcare in terms of, the conversations that we were having as staff
Mm-hmm.
about patients,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a big pet peeve of mine was
Mm-hmm.
you kind of have these water cooler patients that everybody in the unit's talking about, even
Mm-hmm.
the providers, and everybody's just kind of wringing their hands together going, why can't we make movement here? And it's like, because the way that we're talking about it as professionals
Mm-hmm.
is not what's happening in that room. And they need that clarity. They
Right.
need it in a compassionate way. You need to have some training when you have these conversations. But, the conversations that I was having as a bedside nurse with the team versus what conversations were happening in the room were night and day. And it became clear why patients and families were really struggling to, come to terms with what was going on in the room and how to approach those decisions appropriately.
Speaking of end of life care, you eventually started your own business, right? Let's talk about starting that business and really what kind of services that you were providing that were focused, of course, on advanced care planning, what lessons you learned from that experience, and just take us through the lifespan of that business.
The idea for the business was born out of all the issues I saw at the bedside in the ICU. And everything felt very reactive. It felt like we were doing nothing proactive. I was getting these people at the 11th hour. They were super, super sick. And all of a sudden now we were forcing either ourselves, a palliative care team, somebody to come in and try to have conversations about what was going on in the room. And it all felt like it was way too late. And so I started, toying with the idea of, well, how can we get ahead of this? How can we be more proactive about it? And it turned out that there was a system in Wisconsin that had really taken what's called advanced care planning by the horns and grew it from a community-based standpoint. And they had some really great data that came out of there. So, thank you for clarifying what a DNR is for people, because I don't know my audience. So, yes, for non-medical people, advanced care planning is just the process by which you do a couple of things. You elect a healthcare power of attorney, so somebody to make medical decisions for you
Mm-hmm.
if you become unable to make them for yourselves. It's not estate planning. It has nothing to do with finances or what's going to happen to your house afterwards. It's
Mm-hmm.
just for medical decisions. And so we did, the first thrust of that was to meet with people in the community, explain to them what a healthcare power of attorney is, why it's important, okay, because we don't know what's going to happen on any given day.
Right.
Okay, you can leave, you can get into a car accident and suddenly not be able to make decisions for yourself. And you need somebody to do it. And you need somebody that A, you trust, and B, who knows what you would want in those situations, right? So then we talked about why maybe your spouse would not be the best person. Maybe they are. Maybe they are somebody who can just advocate for you. But when you've been married to somebody for 60 years, sometimes that gets a little dicey.
Yeah.
And so we just like to kind of lay out what we've seen as practitioners over the years. And
Yeah.
again, give you all the information that you need to make the best decision for yourself.
Yeah.
So the first prong was always just electing a healthcare power of attorney. Who are we going to in the event that you can't tell us what you need? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully you've had some conversations with that person regarding the big things. Okay. Because when you're young, like you are, you just want to cover the big what ifs. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
As people age and as diagnoses come, sometimes you can narrow that conversation to a lot more specific
Right.
goals.
Mm-hmm.
But in the beginning, it's just broad. Let's elect somebody. Let's talk about the big things. And, that's always the second part of it is, let's talk about what CPR is. Let's talk about organ donation.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about what a coma is, what a persistent
Mm-hmm.
vegetative state is, these kind of
Mm-hmm.
things that I see all the time. Everybody thinks they're not going to happen to me. And hopefully, knock on wood, they don't happen to anybody, but we know that they do every day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so it just, pays to be prepared for that. And so we wanted to give people a place in the community to come in and do that for a very, it was cheap. It was like a $20 copay. So, and we felt like that was a really big, really good bang for your buck, to come in and kind of get this knowledge from people who see it firsthand, help you prepare. And then everything fell on us after that. We were going to follow up with you. And just, every year you get a call from us. Has anything changed? You want to come in and talk about anything, any new diagnoses, things that, might change the conversation. Maybe I have a cancer diagnosis now. And so this becomes a much more important issue in your life than to prepare for. So, that was kind of the thrust of what we did as a business.
Okay, that's perfect. How early should people start discussing advanced care planning where it can feel guilt-free and still kind of compassionate and socialize, like they're able to discuss it without this impending doom feeling over their heads? How early can people start to discuss having an advanced care planning?
Yeah, 18 is perfect. I mean,
18,
even
wow.
I would love to go to high schools as well. And the reason for that is they're invincible. Nothing is going to happen to me, right?
Yeah.
And that's a great thing. So they don't, and they're just open at that age, right? So it's not a threat to them in any way. But we do know that the leading cause of death, 18 to 25, is trauma, right? So whether it's a car accident, an ATV accident, motorcycle accident, when you are, and I was one of those kids, okay? I almost died in a car accident at 17, just being a young kid. And so, I often think about that, not to get too graphic, but, like at some point when the car was flipping, my head went through the side window and I was knocked out.
Oh,
and,
God.
I woke up in the hospital, and I often think about what would have happened if I just never woke up. And that's like the slightest difference between myself and somebody else who does find themselves in that situation. So, doing it early is not only appropriate because we know these things happen, but you also have to understand that your parents at that age, they're not going to want to make, maybe the decision that you probably want them to make, which is, if I have a massive brain injury, and again, I'm not brain dead, but I'm in some sort of persistent vegetative state, either from an anoxic injury or whatever. I don't want to live that way, and I need to tell my parents that from a very early age. Yeah, so that if and when, God forbid, that situation comes, the script is flipped on the guilt. All of a sudden, now I'm empowered to make the decision that Luke wanted. Because he told me that, he verbalized that. And now to not do that is knowingly going against what they wanted. And that's a difficult hurdle to get over for people. So, getting it early and getting people to understand what it is that you do want or don't want really helps down the road if you ever find yourself in that situation. So 18 is the answer. Through college, and you can do this through community-based outreach programs. So like I said, whether that's to local high schools, colleges, it doesn't matter. Do it for free. Just go in and just kind of talk to them, start the conversation. But then really, and I think you and I talked about this, this is best as a PCP adjunct. The person that you are going to see throughout your life, there's a person in that office that you are talking to. Again, initially to get all the information and education, and then to just follow up through your lifetime, because they have so many advantages in that office. They know all the recent notes from, any inpatient admissions. They know the new diagnoses. They're seeing you once a year to follow up. It is a zero cost to the patient if it is part of their annual well visit. So, I mean, it is an absolutely free service that a PCP can offer, and should be. And we just aren't. We just aren't in America. And that is, it's a huge opportunity, but it's very frustrating for me at this point.
So if they were to go through you, they draft this advanced care plan, they have a copy. Where do they keep it so that somebody else can access it? Like, if they were in an accident, how is this advanced care plan going to be accessed?
So what that system in Wisconsin did, which was really awesome, is they built up the surrounding population around the hospital system. So, like a city of 50,000 people, they got 95% of their residents to have advanced care planning documents written by this program. And what that did was then it just put it on file within the system, right? Which is one way to approach it. So you're a hospital system, you set up your program, you start getting people every day, and you just start building that database so that if and when those people come through your doors, you now have a document that's been updated at least within the year. Okay, so that's a lot better than, hey, I signed this 30 years ago when I got married and I haven't looked at it since. There isn't a physician in the world who's going to look at that document and go, okay, we're going to use this to guide our care, versus one that may have been updated within the last 6 months. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So one way to do it is to just do it from a system-based standpoint with your surrounding population. There are states that have statewide databases and that are trying to build statewide databases so that if you are EMS and you are getting dispatched to a call, whether that is, an accident on the road or to a home, all of a sudden we can now tie, your advanced care plan to your address, to you as a person, right? There are countries, obviously in Europe, where they do a lot more of this stuff, Switzerland probably, where you can get chipped. Wow. All we're doing now is scanning, boom, there's what I want. I am a DNR or I'm not, or whatever it is. They're getting chipped with these things now. So there's a lot of ways to, skin that cat, I think. But we have to get off go. Like, we're not even off the starting block yet in terms of this. So, I think the best way to do it is just kind of normalize the conversation first. And if you're young and you're going to a PCP, there's no reason why this should not be happening for you in the outpatient setting, and just kind of get that going. Because then we can have that conversation from a systems level. If I'm a health system, I'm maybe going to the different PCPs that we probably own anyway, right? You have your big network of them. So then it's just a free flow of data, via the EMR. So it's really not that difficult. But we have to start having the conversations to begin with.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about your role during that COVID-19 pandemic, right? And really just the nursing role in healthcare during that time. You made the decision to leave your family and volunteer in New York City at the height of the pandemic, New York City, which had, overwhelming death tolls. What was that experience like for you? I know we're going back like 5 years, but I want to talk about that, especially because you were featured in Good Morning America, honored at the White House. What was that experience like for you professionally and personally? And what did that mean to you as a nurse to leave your home base and go to New York and volunteer during the pandemic?
To be honest, it could probably be 50 years ago, and I'll remember it. I think I'm actually getting misty eyed just thinking about it, just talking about it. And I don't want to be that way, but I think a lot of us who were there never really fully processed everything that kind of went on. And I'm not a hyperbolic person. I was a big fan of doing Facebook Lives during that time because I felt like people just needed kind of unbiased information. Like, hey, here's what's going on, especially hospital systems back home. Like, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what we're doing. Here's what's working. Not a lot. Here's what's not working. Those sort of things. And so let's see. Personally, nobody knew what was going to happen. I left on a Tuesday thinking I'd be back on the weekend to grab some stuff and pack a little bit more. I never came home for 4.5 months or whatever it is. And I missed my my daughter's first birthday, my wife's first Mother's Day. And, I was isolated. Once you were done at the hospital, whenever that was, I went home to somebody who was kind enough, and it was a huge kindness to give me like a basement apartment in their house. But it was four walls, no windows, so you get done with this kind of depressing work at the hospital, and then you go home to four walls and no windows, sleep for a brief amount of time, and strap your boots on again for the next day. So it was a very difficult time personally, to be away from my family. And certainly there are those out there who say that's what you signed up for. And that is true. That is 100% true. And I don't regret it at all. But it doesn't make it any easier. It's like, there's no point in telling a soldier like, hey, this is what you signed up for. Like, it is, but it's still awful at times, and it was at times, but there were a lot of silver linings that I take from it as well. I'm just an optimistic person. So, I try not to focus on the negatives. But there were some personally, but we're all good now. Professionally, try to just touch on like the big things. And I don't even know if we'll ever be faced with like something like this again in our lifetime. But if by chance we are, and let's hope we aren't, but if we are, just know that what you see on the news and whatnot is very rarely the truth. And not necessarily because people are trying to spin it, but just because there's a lag time. So, the conversation that dominated outside of where we were was PPE, number of ventilators. And what I think a lot of people who would tell you who were there is that neither one of those things were nearly as important as the lack of trained professionals that we had during the time that it really ramped up. And that's another thing that I think it's lost in that is because of the red tape involved, we just could not get nurses and providers and respiratory therapists there quick enough. And so when things hit that ramp up period, it seemingly happened overnight to where we were okay to where we were most definitely not okay. That was a distinct night that happened. And I walked in the next day and life had kind of changed. And it was that way for 10 to 14 days of just, we're losing ground. We're losing everything here. And so the system is not set up to get you help that quickly. It's not. So by the time people actually came to help, things had plateaued. We weren't getting the admissions anymore. People were still really, really sick who were there. We just weren't getting the influx that we had for those 2 weeks where it just was like, oh my God, how many more people can come? So by the time people actually arrived, they were canceling contracts. They were sending people back home because now they had hired for this to continue, that kind of influx to continue. And it did. And people stayed inside and they quarantined and they did the things that were necessary to help get the numbers down that were coming into the ED. So, that's one of the big things is like, it's very hard to get at truth in those moments because things are happening so quickly that by the time it gets out to the general public, the situation has probably changed 2 or 3 times already. So that was an interesting thing to witness in real time. The other thing is what it's like to be a part of something that is, and I hate to use this word, but it's true, unprecedented, because we had never experienced anything like that. And you don't know what exactly the curveballs are going to be that get thrown your way, right? Some you can prepare for, like, oh, hey, we'll need more PPE or more staff. But there are other things too that, the hospital that I spent the majority of my time in ran out of oxygen. It's like we had 240 vents plugged in at one time and nobody thinks that this is a pressurized system like the water in your house. If you turn on all the faucets, take 5 showers, all of a sudden the pressure is going to drop. And that's what happened, with the oxygen at the hospital was that we could no longer provide 100% oxygen for a brief time because we just had too many people trying to pull from that. So it was, stuff like that really stands out in terms of, wow, that is just something that you would never have expected in American healthcare. We just kind of assume these things are always going to be there. We always have what we need. But that was difficult. The amount of loss was on another level. We don't, the iPad thing got all the press, which eventually became the thing. And honestly, I want to say that was out of compassion for families, but honestly, and it was, but a lot of that was just to save the sanity of the people who had to go through the version of that was a speakerphone, where you're in all your gear, you are sweaty, you haven't taken it off for 8 hours, and you're in a room alone with a person who may or may not even be alive anymore, and you have to just hold that speakerphone up and let the family go through their grief over the phone, and you have to experience it with them too. All five of them,
over and over again.
Yep, patient after patient after patient, and that is the thing that I think really, it affects people. And I saw a lot of seasoned nurses like myself, and I just, I would tell people everybody had their day. Everybody had their day where it was just their day to go lose it in the corner, pound the wall, do whatever it was. And it was on the rest of us to just go, it's their day. Okay, let's pick them up, lighten the load however we can for them. Because even the hardest people are really having a tough time with it at least once. You know what I mean? So it was tough to watch people like that go through it. But those were the negatives. There were positives too. I don't know if you want to talk about them, but at least personally, there were positives.
How your critical care experience and end of life care experience kind of intersected in these moments. But there's something that you had written on one of your LinkedIn posts, and it beautifully describes the unseen moments in nursing, right? You said the quiet, profound connections with patients that you really can't put a dollar value on. Why do you think these moments matter so much? And what do you think we can carry forward about the role of nurses in healthcare from the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, they matter now more than ever because we are increasingly losing sight of the fact that this is a human profession, and the most human profession that exists. You're going to meet people who are at their absolute worst and lowest, most vulnerable. They need your help. They don't want anybody to help, but there they are and they need it. And so how you approach that, whether it's to help save them or to help them transition toward death, it doesn't really matter. But nurses are one of those people. I always tell people we're the only profession that is there from the moment that you open your eyes as a baby to the time you close them, when you die. We're the only people, the only ones that get to be there throughout that entire journey. And because of that, the public has a very positive perception of us. So, the famous study that we're like the most trusted profession in America for 24 of the last 25 years running. We lost, I don't want to say lost, the firefighters in 2000. Yeah, the firefighters in 9/11.
They deserved it.
They certainly did. And they probably still do. I mean, I'm happy to share this award every year with our first responders. But what it really speaks to is that that's the thing that resonates most with the patients and the public, right? I don't want to say we don't do anything special, but because we do. And the thing that we do that is really special is we connect with you. Okay, we have you 12 hours a day, multiple days in a row. Those moments, wherever you choose to find them, those are the ones that stick with people. Okay. And one of the questions that I get often is, Luke, what's the best hospital you ever worked at? Because I traveled for so many years. And I always tell people they're kind of all the same. And it does not matter. You could go to Johns Hopkins and the patient could not like their provider or not have good nurses, and they could leave there going, I don't see what the big deal is. This place is not worth its reputation. They could go to the lowest community hospital and have the exact opposite experience and walk away from that going, this place is awesome. I'm not going anywhere else for my care. And the common thread here is nurses. They have just this incredible ability to shape the experience of the patient. But the general public has no idea what we do. We exist behind this pulled curtain. And so what the COVID-19 pandemic did, I think, first and foremost, was to pull back the curtain a little bit and shed a light on what nurses do, what they go through with patients. I mean, it's a shared journey. Like, we are there with you. You know what I mean? We are doing all the things with you. And it's like trauma bonding half of the time, And so you don't know that unless you've ever been in that situation or had a family member who was ever in that situation. Everybody else is just kind of blissfully unaware of what we really do as professionals. except for the people that go through it. And so, COVID-19 kind of like pulled back the curtain, and for the first time, the general public was like, "Hey, these nurses are really in there doing the thing." When I got invited to the White House, I really just wanted to talk kind of briefly about why I felt nurses were awesome and why they deserved respect, and why they deserved your attention. And I don't know how good I did, but that's what I wanted to get across. And that's the thing that I would love to see carried on, but it's not. This is the sad reality of being 5 years post all of that, is we are almost back to the same exact thing we were before. And it's, to those of us who now have lived nursing pre-COVID, also during COVID, now after, it's very clear to kind of see that and be very disenfranchised with it. We have a lot of people who are new that just either were brand new nurses during the pandemic or now are coming in afterwards, and they really have no idea. And I think the system is kind of taking advantage of that a little bit. And that's, again, pretty disheartening, but, kind of.
Yeah, thank you so much. You answered my question perfectly. Two things I want to highlight. First, you said it feels like we're back to where we were. And then the other thing is, as you were talking about this recognition of nurses being the most trusted profession for, whatever many decades running, do you think that, and I don't mean to play devil's advocate here, but do you think that that label of compassion and trust and values like maintaining patients' dignity and seeing the patient, connecting with them, do you think that that can lead to nurses' contributions, intellectual contributions, specifically getting overlooked?
I get what you're saying. I don't know that I connect the two. What I do think is that from a system standpoint, they will absolutely exploit those connections that you have, that empathy that you have, the ethics that you have, the compassion that you have. They will exploit that in order to wring the absolute most out of you physically and mentally and emotionally in order to serve the system. That I do believe, and I have seen that first and foremost. It's their patients, we got to take care of them. You got to, doesn't matter if you're tripled in the ICU every day. Like, that's what needs to be done. No,
and
it's
I
not.
think the question is like, sorry, maybe I need to rephrase it. It's like, because we are seen for these other nurturing values, do you think that we then downplay the other parts of nursing, including research, the science, the epidemiology, the other parts of nursing that need to be highlighted more, right?
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's no clearer example of this than the data that has existed for almost 2 decades about the dangers of short staffing. We have every and again, when I go back to no buzzwords, evidence-based practice is one of the biggest buzzwords out there, but it's like, what's the evidence? Who's doing the evidence? Okay. And like, what are we doing about the evidence? Because this evidence that says if you are short-staffed, even by one nurse, mortality increases by X amount. That data has existed for decades. It's not changed. It's becoming more and more robust, but yet we bury our head in the sand about that, and we don't want to do anything about that. And so, like the things that nurses are actually contributing in terms of research, the intellectual side for sure is being, kind of just ignored, I think, when it's convenient. If it fits the narrative, they'll be happy. They'll be happy to trump up your research and tell you that, sir, we're going to spend $1 million on new Kuros caps because it cuts down on collapses. Thank you very much for bringing this to our attention. Does it? I don't know. I've actually heard conflicting stories about the Kuros caps, but the point is, if it fits the narrative, they're happy to, but if it doesn't, then no. And unfortunately, nurses are in a position where they're doing the care every day. They know what the problems are. They're doing research to help address those problems, and they're being ignored. So I think that's the point that you're kind of getting at is, are they disproportionately, ignored? Yes. Because the issues that they're trying to address are the everyday ones that the system is not set up to really solve. Yeah. Because it's a business at the end of the day. And, that's really where this goes this way. Yeah. It's very hard to marry a business mindset with a compassionate mindset. Yeah. And everybody who's been in this business for long enough knows that, and knows what will win out at the end of the day.
You've said that you love being a nurse and you want others to feel the same, even though initially you started off wanting to be a physician. Have you ever regretted going the nursing route and looking back and said, okay, I've spent all these years, I could have just gone to medical school? That's a personal question. So,
Yeah.
but how do you think that for people who, like you, feel disillusioned by the nursing profession, how can we restore that sense of purpose and fulfillment? And how do you feel about nursing now that you've been in it for 16 years plus?
Well, I feel like I made the right decision. I very, very rarely regret the decision to not become a physician. Every once in a while, I'll meet a very young attending and I go, ooh, that would have been cool. Only from a standpoint of, I think I have a nurse's mindset. And that's not a knock on physicians. It's just that generally speaking, they're a bit more pragmatic. We're a bit more, this is a science and an art. You know what I mean? And the communication happens that way. And I've seen physicians who have really great bedside manner, really great compassion and communication, and they're like unicorns, and the patients just really respond to them well. And so if I had just stuck out the medical portion of it, I think I had the communication part of it that would have, helped me have a successful career. But ultimately, I get to do what I get to do 12 hours a day. And so I love it personally, and I don't regret anything. In terms of what we can do for the profession that's just coming up, and how can we, restore joy at the bedside? How can we make the bedside a destination? We want to make it, the new Bora Bora. This is where you got to be.
And not everyone who's moving beyond the bedside. Like that's like a new buzzword now, beyond the bedside. And it's like, what's wrong?
I get it.
I get it too. I get it. But it almost makes it look like the bedside is just a passing phase. You don't stop there. Which
and there is the rumblings, the beginnings of talk about how we're gonna, start changing some of the verbiage that we use about the bedside in order to make it a fulfilling career. And one of the things that now my current role, one of them is I'm a clinical coordinator at a hospital in their intermediate ICU. And I really fell in love with intermediate care because, well, for a lot of reasons, but, I get to interact with a bunch of staff now who are a couple months off orientation or 6 months or less off orientation. And I love them. And I feel so much for the anxieties that they have coming into work every day. And I just try to tell them, like, if you can stick it out, if you can get to where I am, you'll find so much more joy in this job, because you don't sit in your car. I don't sit in my car before a shift's going, oh God, I hope nothing bad happens today. You get to a point where you just walk in and you get to be, and you're not, you walk into a room and my focus is the patient, because everything else that's happening in there, I'm absorbing, but I don't have to spend a lot of mental energy on doing the tasky things or making sure that I'm charting or all that. I've now reached a point of expert level where I can do that. And now my focus can solely be, once again, on the patient. But that is a journey that you have to, it takes years. It's a sadness for me that there are just less and less people who are making it to that kind of finish line where you are getting from novice to expert. If y'all read the book back in the day, but we have to, so how do we keep them? We need better leadership. Okay. I could give you 1,000 examples of poor leadership over the years. I can give you a few of good leadership as well, but we're all trying to navigate, what it's like to have a new generation of nurses coming out with their expectations, not only for their workforce. And, what is that? It's difficult, right? They're coming in expecting work-life balance, expecting to be supported in ways that the system has not done for decades. And so the system's looking at them going, you need to get up to speed. And they're looking at them going, there's 20 other things that I could be doing, making this money, and I'm going to go do that. And that's really the reality of where we're at. So the whole beyond the bedside thing is like, hey, listen, nurses are problem solvers. They're driven. They're business minded. They're intellectual. They are the Swiss Army knife. And because of that, they have the skills to go somewhere else and make the same living with a lot less stress, a lot less exposure to violence. And so I don't blame them. So we have to look at it from a system standpoint, saying, what's really driving this burnout? And I think there's a lot of good data and research emerging about what is driving burnout and the turnover that happens every 2 years, but we have to start listening to that. This goes back to the other question. It's like, the data is out there. We know what has to change, but are we actually going to change it? And so far the answer is no. And in fact, we're being very stubborn and we're almost doubling down on it. And we're doing a lot of things that are short-sighted solutions that are, I think, only serving to further the divide.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with a guy on LinkedIn the other day, very respectful conversation. It was great. And I actually want to continue it. I haven't responded to him yet. But he runs an international staffing agency. And this is one of those moves that I get it, but also like it's very hard as a bedside nurse to go, this is just their way of not paying more for the labor, They're getting people in from, the Philippines or, wherever where the cost of living is much less. And the wage that they're willing to pay is very good for them. It's not so much for your average American who has a car payment and a mortgage and wants to take a couple of vacations throughout the year, God forbid, and who doesn't want to work 60 hours a week in order to do so. So, that's just one of those types of solutions that's becoming in vogue across the country that I don't necessarily agree with. I understand it.
Yeah.
And, his conversation was, what would you need to see in order to kind of, accept this as part of hospital operation? It's like, well, cap it. A certain percentage of your workforce can be internationally based nurses. I still believe in America being, hey, come work, be a productive member of society. Sure, come, but not at the expense of the people that are here.
Eventually, those internationally trained nurses will need more because they're going to be living a different lifestyle now, not to mention trying to help their family back home. Right. So whatever you think,
or they go back home.
Right,
it's still a temporary solution.
Right. So whatever you think you're paying them, eventually they're going to have the same complaints that your American nurses have because living expenses will change, food, everything, all of those things will be different. Yeah. But very good conversation. So glad to have spoken with you today. I feel like we could keep talking and keep delving deeper into many of these issues. I don't even know that we have a specific title for this episode because we've touched on several different things, but let's not leave without playing our game. So if you have seen any, you're ready with your fingers. If you have seen any shows or currently watching any medical shows or whatever, what are your thoughts about how nurses are portrayed in media?
Well, they're an afterthought in every medical show for the most part. The second is... You
said they're an afterthought, right?
Yeah, they're very, it's always based on physicians, we always think of ER and I didn't watch a lot. Grey's Anatomy, There you go. That was always the big one, right? It was ER where George Clooney was born, and then it was Grey's Anatomy was the next one for like 15 years. And now we've got The Pit, which I have heard really good things about The Pit. I have not seen an episode, but I've heard that it's much more realistic. Yeah. And actually, what I always tell people is the most realistic medical show that I've ever seen was Scrubs.
Scrubs, everyone says that.
You want a real look behind it.
Yeah.
Scrubs. It's Scrubs every day. Now, I don't know, we want the general public knowing that about the hospital, but it is the reality anyway. Yeah. But, one of the things that occurs, and they have to do some quality control of this stuff, is that we now have to undo a lot of what the general public sees in these shows. So again, coming back to end of life, the things that people, the perceptions that they have of what CPR is, or, hey, we just, this is boop and you're back and you want a cheeseburger later that afternoon. That's not really how life works. And so, regardless of what show it is, I think all of us in medicine would just prefer like, hey, I get that you have to dramatize things, but don't do it at the expense of like decades of, misinformation and really putting us behind the eight ball. It's bad enough we got to go, with WebMD and Google MD, that we have, the TV shows. But I can't say I watch a whole lot of them. Nurses in the ones that I have watched are generally not well represented. Kind of just minor characters.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, now let's play our game. Now you can get excited. Okay, so here I go with my jar. I'm going to pick out a category and you come up with a plot that is more suitable, that is more accurate to our profession. Okay, you got the gist of it?
I got it.
Okay. So your category is action. Are you an action kind of guy?
Action.
Let's go.
Okay. So an action about a nurse. So, full disclosure,
Mm-hmm.
I had actually started a screenplay. It's like a writing exercise. It was about a male nurse, and it was,
Okay.
if you want to think of it, it was basically Die Hard meets the hospital.
Oh, wow. I'm
And
exposing
so,
secrets on here.
yeah, it was, and obviously I would never want this to happen, but active shooters have been in the news for, I don't know, almost 20 years now. It seems
Mhm.
like Columbine was kind of like my first one that I remember in my consciousness, and that was almost 20 years ago. So an active shooter comes into a hospital. They're easy to get into for the most part. And if you get into an ICU, it's just a whole bunch of people there who can't fight back. And it seems like an awful way to extract a lot of, you know, human toll. So I played around with the idea that an active shooter coming in, taking over an ICU, but then, the main character is obviously a nurse. And he does the whole Bruce Willis thing and goes in and he figures out, how to dispatch of the bad guys
Nice.
in various ways. But, I think the lead up to when the bad guys show up, you can kind of show what it's like to be a nurse, normal interactions, normal day as a nurse, but then also throughout highlight the things that we all are, which are, again, smart, problem solvers, action oriented, like the things that we know that all nurses kind of just have, those
Mm,
qualities that are really, really apparent to those of us who work in the profession, but not necessarily to people who are outside of the profession, right?
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
just use the plot then, to move along kind of those qualities and highlight them as human beings and what they value, and what they bring to the table as really dynamic players in the healthcare system.
Love
Um,
it. Yeah.
so yeah,
Awesome. Okay. Die,
I'd go watch it.
die Hard RN. I love that. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. All right. So, final question. If you could recommend anyone to be a guest on the show, who would it be?
I got a lot of respect for Rebecca Love. I don't know if you're on,
Rebecca.
anybody who's really involved in the Commission for Nursing Reimbursement. I think, when I look at the hurdles that I face in terms of advanced care planning, how to get that implemented from a system standpoint, because it is about revenue. It's still a business, right? And I think what they're doing is just so, so important in figuring out how to monetize what we do. We talked a lot today about, all the profound moments and the things that nurses do, but how do we start to quantify that and also monetize it so that we start to kind of place ourselves in a higher position at the table, And so anybody who's really doing work in that realm would be great, I think, because I think people need to know that that's going on.
Yeah.
And then that's an avenue that we're pursuing as a profession. I think it's a very necessary one. So just bringing awareness to it and learning about, what we can do as nurses to help support them in that endeavor, because that's one of the ways forward, really. The system, I don't know how much you know about it, but like,
Mhm.
nurses being included in the room and board rate as an expense for the hospital.
Might as well be
Uh,
the IV drip.
yeah, and it's 100 years old or something ridiculous, maybe even older than that. That's the system that we're currently under, and I think it's time for a change, and I really respect them for going at it full bore.
Yeah.
And so that I would, anybody in that realm.
Rebecca's is a rock star, and I had Marini and Melissa Mills
Yeah.
on already. And we got to talk about the commission. So thank you so much. Where can people find you to connect with you?
I've been more active on the LinkedIn
Yeah.
recently. You can find me
The
on the
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Showing your age.
Um, You'll find me under no buzzwords, or above
Yeah.
no buzzwords. But
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, that's probably the best place to find
Okay.
me in terms of nursing. I try to keep it pretty professional on there, and I'm never short to engage in conversation with anybody about anything.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. It's been such a powerful conversation. Thanks for reminding us that leadership in nursing is not about titles. It's about intention. It's about action. It's about showing up with clarity, courage, and just really caring deeply about the people that you serve, not just about having a whole bunch of titles and buzzwords. And even when the system makes it hard, to keep on leading with all of your heart and knowing that this is a purpose, this is a calling. So it doesn't matter if you're at the bedside, it doesn't matter if you are building a business, it doesn't matter if you are finding your way or somewhere in between. I think that people will gain a lot from this conversation, and it's a nudge for us to all lead with purpose. And just know that you too can be a part of the change that nursing needs. So thank you for being here, Luke. It's been a pleasure to have you guys. Please be sure to like and subscribe and share this with your friends. Give huge thanks to Luke for keeping it real and for just pushing the conversation forward. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Thanks for hanging with me till the end. I hope you gained some valuable insight into the world of nursing. If today's episode inspired you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear about the amazing work nurses are doing. Let's keep breaking stereotypes and reshaping the narrative together. I'll see you next time.